This is Grace Notes. I'm Alan Button, and pleased to have as our special guest today for our special Father's Day edition, Buddy Michaels. Buddy, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Alan.
Some of you no doubt recognize Buddy's name. Buddy is our regular morning show host on Hometown Festival, our bluegrass program, Saturday mornings from 7 to 9. And Buddy and I were talking a week or so ago, and he was telling me a little bit about his dad. And I thought, Buddy, we need to have you in the studio and talk about some of your memories, because memories of dads are things that most of us can relate to. So
absolutely,
we're going to talk about your dad.
And I'd like to say this, we're timeless favorites. And I started out playing this kind of music on the radio. I didn't always do bluegrass. Bluegrass is like my retired radio choice.
Radio has been your career for some
45 years.
We'll put a little teaser in here. We're going to wrap up the show with the very first song that you played as a radio host.
Yes, sir.
Let's jump back to your dad. Tell us when he was born and where he was born and where he grew up in his early years.
He was born in 1925 in White Earth, Minnesota, a Indian reservation in the northwest corner of Minnesota, near the Canadian border. And when he was a small child, maybe 4 or 5, they moved to Red Lake Indian Reservation, which is a few hundred miles south of that. What was
the tribe that he was a part of?
Well, Chippewa is what he always said. Chippewa is what the Americans said, or white people in America said, and the French called them Ojibwe or Ojibwa. It's spelled both ways. He answered to both.
Well, what was it about his growing up on the reservation that either you heard about or was the context for some of his influence on you?
I have 3 brothers, and the 4 of us, we heard these stories all the time growing up, how he used to trap animals. When he was a small child, he would do this every morning. He'd go out and check his traps before he even ate breakfast.
Source of revenue for the family, no doubt.
Revenue for the family, meat and pelts, because people paid for the furs and the skins, and that was just a way of life. And he had a lot of chores to do. He had a lot of work to do, and he would then go to school. And he would tell us great stories about school and how they would fight on the playgrounds. The Native American boys would call each other tribe names to start a fight. He would say, well, if a Chippewa boy called another Chippewa boy a Sioux, there'd be a fight.
That was not the thing to do.
No, not the thing to do. That's very politically incorrect, but we're talking children here, and back in the probably 30s then, so.
Speaking of the reservation being up north, what was the snow like up there?
He said it was incredible. He would tell me stories that when he would go to bed at night, if there was a blizzard, he would carry his shovel up to his bedroom upstairs and lay it next to his bed. So in the morning, he could open up the window and go out across the roof of the porch, and he'd be down there at the front door to be able to shovel the snow away from the front door, because he said the drifts were 6-7 feet tall, and nobody could get out of the house till he shoveled a walkway to the door. He swears that was the truth.
How long did he live there on the reservation?
Until he was about 17, and then he joined the Navy for World War II.
And ended up in Eastern Virginia, I guess.
Yes, after 18 months in the Pacific on the USS Enterprise, which he was very proud of. That was the most decorated ship during World War II, and I believe was the most decorated ship in the history of America, if I'm not sure. Aircraft carrier. And he was a third-class petty officer, which was a low officer, but still with very little education, he earned that, working during the war times. And he was a deck officer, so he made sure that the planes got in and out of the elevators safely when they would fly in or bring them out.
How old was he when he joined the Navy?
17. Yeah, he never left the Indian Reservation until he was 17.
Boy,
and what a world, he said.
I was going to say, talk about an eye-opener.
Oh, he said I was just wide-eyed and just everything was new to him. He'd never seen anything like this stuff. He said I'd seen it in magazines.
How long was he in the Navy?
4 years, I believe that was the normal stint back then.
So it was the end of World War II, and then he had some other time after the war.
Yeah, he spent 18 months active duty, and then he was stationed in Norfolk. Actually spent 6 months or so in New York, New York City. He came back with some kind of infection of the skin, and he had to spend some time in a naval hospital there. He said, I saw the Rockettes, and he said, I got to skate, because he loved to skate, because he grew up ice skating. He loved to skate, so he skated at Madison Square Gardens. And
Rockefeller Center, maybe?
Rockefeller Center. I don't know enough. I've never been to New York City, but he spent some time there, and he said what they would do is they would give him his treatments for a couple hours during the day, then he was good to go, and he would go out and wander around the streets. He said, I'd ride the buses and the subways and whatever, and he said, I'd go to the movies and just check out everything, and then he'd check back in. He had a bed check, and he would go back to the hospital and sleep and then start all over. He did that for, I think, 3 or 4 or 6 months, something like that. Then he was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia.
And is that where you met your mom?
Met my mom in Suffolk, Virginia, which is about 30 minutes west of Norfolk. And Norfolk was just such a big naval base and a Navy town that there was so much going on and things that he wanted a good old country girl, a relationship with a normal human being and not in the Navy area district. And he and a buddy of his in uniform hitchhiked over to Suffolk, and they went to the movies because they thought, well, we'll find a girl at the movie theater. And my mom and her girlfriend were in the movies that night. I wish I knew the movie. But they were sitting behind them 3 or 4 rows, and they started throwing popcorn at them. And, of course, they got their attention, and then they followed them out and wanted to walk them home. They said, well, we're going down here to get a hot dog. And my dad and his buddy, they followed them, and they went in and sat in the booth with them and got to talking to them. And my dad said he fell in love with her right off the bat. So when they had their hot dogs and got out, my dad walked my mom home, was just a few blocks. And he got her phone number, I guess. And next thing I know, they dated for a while, and they were married like within 5 or 6 months. So my mom was probably 18 at the time.
Well, tell us where this first song fits in. Lovesick Blues.
Lovesick Blues on the very first date. Now, that was the first night they met at the movies, and their very first date that they went out. A lot of dates bring flowers, candy. My dad brought my mom a record. Evidently, they talked about music that first get-together, and Lovesick Blues by Hank Williams was a hot song at the time. And so he went and bought that record for her for their first date and gave it to her. And she always remembers that because she said, we used to listen to that for hours. That was our favorite song.
So music is part of your background? You
absolutely
ended up in radio?
Yeah,
music?
absolutely.
Well, let's hear the song, Lovesick Blues by Hank Williams.
I got a feeling now and I'm lonesome. I got the lovesick blues.
Well, that was Lovesick Blues by
Hank Williams Sr.
Thank you. Hank Williams Sr. Yeah, there was some yodeling in there, buddy. He was quite the yodeler, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Neat song.
My dad never yodeled. It's funny, my dad, he never played an instrument. His dad played the fiddle. He had a sister played piano. He had a brother played guitar. Everybody in his family, and there was like 12 kids in the family, and they all played music but my dad. And my dad learned to dance when he was very little. And in the French-Canadian Native American world, I guess, they called it jigging. Down south, they would call it clogging or buck dancing, some people would call it. But it's pretty much the same thing with more of a French-Canadian fiddle tune background. And he heard that a lot when he was growing up, so he learned to dance. And the story is my grandfather, his father, would take him with his dad and go to different places and play the fiddle. They called them roadhouses, gin houses,
was
whatever.
This outside the reservation?
Outside the reservation, because they didn't have any alcohol on the reservation at the time. Well, they probably did, but it wasn't legal. So anyway, they would take him to roadhouses, and they would play the fiddle, and my dad would dance, and people would throw money, nickels and pennies and dimes. And he said, I'd ride home with a pocket full of change. And he said, of course, my dad and my granddad, they used their money that they took from me to pay for their beverages for the night. And
their adult beverages.
Their adult beverages, of course. And it was funny that when he would get home late, his mom would fuss at his dad, quit taking him into those places. They're full of evilness and somebody's going to get hurt. And his dad would reply, they don't hurt the musicians or the entertainers. They're not going to touch him because he's dancing, he's entertaining. I'm playing the fiddle. They don't hurt. They'll hurt each other, but they won't hurt us. So that was his standard comeback.
Back to Eastern Virginia. You were involved, as I understand it, in your dad's welding shop. Tell us how he got into that.
Well, he learned welding in the Navy, and when he got out of the Navy, he applied at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, which employs a ton of people. And right after World War II, I'm sure a lot of people that stayed in that area and built homes or bought homes or whatever just stayed in that area because there was work there. And he applied, but because he was a Native American, he was overlooked for the job. And
there were some discrimination issues there.
He felt the same way. He was put in with the group, any other people of color were in a group in one room and the white people were in another room, and the white people got the jobs. And my dad said that was the first time he really, because he had just served his nation, and they don't see you as a person of color in the service. They see you as a soldier or a sailor, as a serviceman. And he got the respect there. When he got out, he said, I felt for the first time racism. And he said, I really got a chip on my shoulder about that. And luckily, he looked in the newspaper, and there was a man in Suffolk, Virginia, which is where he was dating my mama at the time, was looking for a welder. And he went and applied. And I'll never forget, he said, Mr. Beck said, can you weld a straight line? And my daddy welded a straight line for him, and he said, you're hired. And he worked there until Mr. Beck died and then bought the business from his widow.
What year was that?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I was probably 10, 11, 12 when Mr. Beck died, and he got the business.
Early 60s then he
probably
had his own business?
Yeah, probably mid-60s.
Tell us about Fats Domino.
Fats Domino, my daddy, even though he didn't play an instrument, he loved to sing. And he would sing to us when we were little kids. He'd sing us Indian songs. He'd sing us any kind of song in the world. But he loved Dean Martin and Fats Domino. They were like his two favorites. He would sing Houston a lot when that would come on the radio. But if you really wanted to get him cranked up, we'd be riding in the truck with him, and Fats Domino would come on the radio, and he would turn it up, and he would sing and sing. And I remember my oldest brother and I, we took our allowance money and bought him a Fats Domino record. I think it was Greatest Hits when we were teenagers for Father's Day. And of course, we put our other brothers' names on there, too. They didn't have any money to give, but we did that.
They were younger brothers.
Yeah, younger brothers. So my oldest brother and I'm number two, and we did that for Father's Day. I'll never forget, he just thought that was the greatest thing in the world.
So your early Father's Day gift to your dad was a Fats Domino record.
Yes. It just seemed like when that came on the radio, he would crank it up and he would just sing.
Let's hear it. Blueberry Hill by Fats Domino.
On Blueberry Hill,
That was Blueberry Hill by Fats Domino. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Buddy Michaels, host of our Saturday Morning Bluegrass Show, Hometown Festival, and one who's got fond memories, as many of us do, of times with our dad. Buddy, you were telling me while we were listening to that song about your dad working a lot, but finding time for you and your brothers. Tell us about that.
Well, he was a hard worker, and he always instilled that in us to work hard, no matter what. And he would come home in the evenings, and a lot of times he was gone in the mornings when we'd get up because he'd already gone into work. He had a lot of work to do, and, running your own business, you spend more time working than you do relaxing. But when he'd get home in the evening, my mom would say, your dad just called, he's coming home. And we lived a fifth of a mile from the main road on a gravel road, and my three brothers and I would go to the end of the road and wait for him. And he would stop when he pulled off the road. And one of us would jump up front, the other three would jump in the bed of the truck, and we'd ride home. It wasn't very far, but it was like the best ride in the world because we hadn't seen our dad all day. And it was just a treat to see him. And, he always hugged us and kissed us. And, it He spent a lot of time with us. In the summertime, we just stayed outside all the time. I mean, and since he was a welder, he built everything out of iron. He built swing sets, a backyard grill, everything. Built my mom's clothesline poles. He built us the pole for a basketball goal and then put some plywood on the front and painted it and put a ring on. I mean, everything he did, he built for us. And, we had all the cool stuff in the neighborhood. He actually would bring home go-karts on Friday evenings that he was working on a go-kart for a customer. And he didn't have it completely done, but it still ran. He'd bring it home, and we'd have the go-kart to play on that weekend.
Uh-huh. Is it fair to say that you're growing up with your dad and your mom and your brothers? It was like we hear some people say that you didn't have a lot of money, but you didn't know it at the time because things were really good.
Things were good. I mean, we were treated good. We had good food. Mm-hmm. We had clothing. We had a very resourceful dad. Let me tell you another story. He never threw things away. He would invent things out of them. Somebody gave him a roll of canvas one time and said, I'm just going to throw this away. Do you want it? And he said, well, I'll take it home and see what I can do with it. Well, it was about 4 by maybe 8 or 10, and it was rolled up. Well, we would go out in the yard and spray each other with a hose in the summertime because it was hot. We didn't have a swimming pool. We just play in the water and slide in the mud, and he had this idea, and he took this thing and he rolled it out in the backyard, and he started wetting it with the hose. Uh-huh. And he said, now y'all run and slide on it. So we run and slide. Oh, man, all the kids in the neighborhood came over again, and we were all sliding up and down this slide. And later in life, we're thinking, my dad had the first idea for a slip and slide. But, hindsight.
He didn't get it patented.
No. And, but he never did stuff like that. He would just make things. And my mom used to say he should have been an engineer because, he had great ideas. He'd come up with things. People would come to him in his business and say, Shorty, that was his nickname because he was a short man, 5'3", and they would say, Shorty, I can't figure this one out. Radio stations used to call him to go work on their towers, weld something on their towers. I don't know what it was, but he got a call at 3 and 4 o'clock in the evening due to a storm. And so I guess radio was in my blood a long time ago, thanks to my dad. So.
Uh-huh. You spent some time working with your dad in his welding shop, I understand, and that didn't last real long?
Well, when I was a teenager, extra money, he would say, come to work with me on a Saturday, half a day. He taught me the different types of metal, angle iron, channel iron, flat iron, pipes, and how to cut it. And, so I learned some pretty basic metal working stuff, learned how to run a lathe, and never did learn how to weld. He would say, do you want me to teach you how to weld? And I'd say, I was scared of welding because I knew about the thing. You got to wear the mask because it'll hurt your retina. It'll hurt your eyes. Yeah. Uh-huh. And he always had problems with his eyes. He always had his eyes burned a lot. So I didn't want to learn how to weld, but I learned to do metal things. But when you're in 95-degree heat and inside a center block building with no air conditioning, very little ventilation, just some windows open, so it's 110 in there, and you're around a heated welding torch, which is putting off heat, and you're working a lathe and you're getting metal shaving stuck in your fingers, and you're sweating. And you got to wear long sleeves because the sparks from the welding will get on you and burn you. So You had to wear long sleeves, sometimes gloves. And when you got out of there, you had sweated a pound or two just being in there a few hours. Mm-hmm. And I got to thinking, I don't really want to do this for a living. There was good money in it, but there's a reason why they pay welders good money.
Well, how'd your dad react when you told him you were interested in radio?
He said, do whatever you want to do, but do a good job at it. Always work hard at it. And if you can make a living out of it, go for it. Do it. And especially if it's something you love. And I think later in life we talked about it, and he said, I'll tell you the truth. He said, I thought, well, that's a hopeless cause. He's not going to be able to do that. That's just a weird business. And 35 years later, when he told me, he said, well, you're very good at what you do, and I don't know about that. But anyway.
You got it right. But
anyway.
Yeah, he was supportive.
Very supportive, always supportive. Both my parents were always supportive no matter what you decide to do. I've got an older brother who is a retired engineer with a hospital. I've got a younger brother who laid tile and designed cabinets and Corian counters for years and retired from that and now working at the Navy shipyard. How ironic. Uh-huh. He makes boxes for the flags for veterans. Uh-huh. He went in mainly for benefits. but he's making good money doing that, and he loves it. He'll never quit. Most of my brothers will never quit working, and I probably won't either, because my dad was such an influence about hard work, and, you quit when you can't work anymore. That was the way he looked at it.
How long's your dad been gone?
My mom was talking about it just the other night, August 20th, 9 years ago this year.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't seem like it. Seems like I just talked to him last week or last night.
Will Robinson, our programming manager, had me listen to a song within the last week or so by Chet Atkins, and the title is something like "I Still Can't Say Goodbye," and it's a song about his dad and how just it seems like yesterday, and doesn't matter how many tears you cry and how hard you try, you still can't say goodbye. Sounds like there's a little bit of that in you with respect to your dad, huh?
It's funny, and I've shared this with my wife and my daughter and my mom. I didn't really cry at his funeral or when they told me he had passed. I didn't cry. I mean, it bothered me, but I just didn't cry. But the first time I visited him, when I found out he had Alzheimer's and saw him in the bed with this disease, when I left coming back home, I cried like a baby.
Uh-huh.
But him passing, I didn't cry.
Well, buddy, it's been great talking with you. So many of the things that you've had to say about your dad, I know resonate with me, and I'm sure many of our listeners. We really appreciate your being here and sharing the stories. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us briefly about this last song we're going to go out with. As we said at the start of the show, the very first song that you played on the radio.
Yeah, that was 46 years ago. This coming September 21st, I believe it was.
Uh-huh.
WCBT in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, which I don't even know if it's still on the air, 12:30 a.m.
Uh-huh.
As Ted Baxter would say, it started on a little 1,000-watt radio station. Anyway, I had gone to night school, and I graduated early, and they placed me in a program, and I was going to do a radio gig there where I did 2 hours during the daytime and 5 hours at night. So I came and worked 11 to 1, farm news, gospel, sunshine for shut-ins is what they call it.
Uh-huh.
And all the farm news in the noon hour. Back when they had block formatting, they catered to everybody in the community. You had rock and roll in the evenings and country and easy listening during the day and farm news in the noon hour. It's just the way it was. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the first time I was on the radio, and I had another fellow DJ came in with me to kind of show me some of the ropes and make sure I didn't do anything crazy. And this was the first song that I ever played and ever introduced. I introduced my name, and I'm the new guy here. And here are the Allman Brothers, Ramblin' Man.
Buddy, thank you again for being here on our Father's Day special. Let's go out with that first song of yours. But let me remind our listeners, too, that they can hear more of you tomorrow morning.
7 until 9.
7 until 9 with Hometown Festival. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Alan.
Here it is, Ramblin' Man by the Allman Brothers.